The last sound Clara Hayes remembered from her wedding night was her husband's voice whispering promises of a long life together. By dawn, gunfire and flames had stolen those promises away. She had knelt in the street with his blood on her hands, the church bells still ringing from the fire that swallowed half the town. Now, days later, the smoke had settled, but the grief had not. The town of Dry Creek looked less like a place of the living and more like a graveyard of timber and dust. Charred beams leaned against each other like broken bones. The saloon's windows were hollow, the swinging doors blackened. Families wandered through the ruins, digging with their hands for scraps of what once was. Clara sat alone on the steps of her burned-out home, a pocket watch pressed against her chest. It was all she had left of Daniel, the man who had carried it since boyhood, its silver cracked but still ticking. The steady beat reminded her that time kept moving even when she wished it would stop. She had been married less than a year. Daniel was not a gunslinger or a lawman, just a carpenter who dreamed of building houses where families could grow old. He had believed Dry Creek was safe, that the railroad would bring prosperity and protection. Instead, the raid had come fast, shadows on horses carrying torches and rifles. They took cattle, burned buildings, and left behind bodies. Some said it was Apache. Others swore it was outlaws wearing feathers to mislead. Clara only knew that Daniel had been shot trying to shield her, and nothing in the world could change that truth. At the edge of town, riders came and went, searching for survivors or the dead. The sheriff, an old man with failing eyes, admitted he could do little. The railroad had promised soldiers, but soldiers never came. Men gathered at the saloon ruins, swearing vengeance. But vengeance sounded empty when their families needed food and water. Clara listened to them argue until their voices turned to noise. She had no strength to hate, only the hollow ache of loss. Far from town, across the desert, another rider moved alone. His name was Takota. His horse was lean, its ribs showing from too many days of hard riding. Takota's face carried scars across his cheek and jaw, the kind that came not from duels but from survival. He had once been proud among his people, a warrior who defended his land. Now he was neither fully welcome among his tribe nor accepted by the settlers who spread across the plains. He carried the weight of both worlds and the peace of neither. Takota's hands still trembled when he thought of the raid. He had ridden with men who claimed it was justice, that settlers must pay for stolen land and broken treaties. He had not lit the fire that burned Dry Creek, but he had not stopped it either. He had drawn his bow, loosed arrows into the night, and seen blood spill. One of those arrows had struck a man running through the street, a man with broad shoulders who shielded a woman behind him. Takota had seen the man fall, and the woman's scream had carried through the smoke. That sound had not left him. Now he rode alone, separated from his war party, carrying shame like a stone in his chest. He did not know why his horse turned back toward the smoking town instead of away. He told himself he sought water, maybe food. But in truth, some part of him sought that woman's voice, the echo of grief that mirrored his own. Back in Dry Creek, Clara could not stand the silence of the burned house. She walked among the ruins, her dress still stained with soot, her hair tangled and dry. Children cried for bread. Mothers searched for wells unpoisoned by ash. She gave what little she had left, a strip of cloth, a few apples untouched by fire, but nothing filled the emptiness inside her. At night she sat by a small fire, the pocket watch ticking beside her, counting seconds that seemed heavier than hours. One evening, as the desert wind shifted, Clara looked up from the flames and saw a figure on horseback at the edge of town. He did not ride in fast like a raider, but slow, cautious, almost uncertain. The townsmen reached for rifles, but the figure raised a hand, showing he carried no weapon drawn. His hair was long, his clothes worn from dust and travel. Clara's chest tightened when she recognized his eyes, dark and steady, the same she had seen through smoke on the night her husband fell. The sheriff stepped forward, hand shaking on his revolver. "Apache," he muttered, though the word carried more fear than certainty. The crowd shifted, anger rising, but the man did not reach for a weapon. He slid from his horse, and stood silent, his gaze fixed on Clara. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the ticking of the watch in her palm. Dakota lowered his head. He did not speak English well, but he forced the words through dry lips. "I come alone." The men shouted, calling him murderer, savage, worse. Clara's heart pounded. She wanted to hate him, to scream, to demand why her husband lay in the ground while he still breathed. Yet something in his eyes, something hollow, broken, stopped her. He looked less like an enemy and more like a man who had lost everything too. The sheriff raised his revolver, ready to end it, but Clara's voice cut through the night. "Wait." It was the first word she had spoken with strength since Daniel's death. Everyone turned, shocked. She stood tall, the pocket watch still clutched tight, and looked at Dakota. If he came to fight, he'd have brought men. Let him speak. The sheriff hesitated, but age and weariness slowed his hand. The other men muttered, unsure. Dakota kept his head bowed, saying nothing more. The silence stretched, thick as the desert night. That silence was the twist no one expected. A widow who had lost her husband to raiders now stood between her town and the man they blamed. The firelight flickered on her face, casting shadows that made her look older, stronger. In that moment, Clara was no longer just a grieving woman. She was the barrier between vengeance and something else not yet named. Later, when the townsmen argued again in hushed voices, Clara sat by the fire, the watch ticking steady. She did not know why she had stopped the bullet mint for Dakota. Maybe it was madness, maybe mercy, or maybe some part of her wanted answers she was not ready to face. The warrior's eyes haunted her, not because of hate, but because of recognition. He carried the same weight she did, the ashes of what once was. As the night deepened, Dakota remained outside the town's edge, sitting by his horse, saying nothing. Clara lay awake, staring at the stars through the broken roof beams. She wondered if silence could ever become something more than grief, or if it would only bury her deeper. The watch ticked on. The fire burned low, and somewhere in the distance, the desert wind carried the faint sound of a rider's call, a reminder that this night was only the beginning. The meeting began with distrust sharp enough to cut the air. Clara Hayes had not slept the night Dakota appeared at the edge of Dry Creek. The men in town wanted him dead, and part of her had wanted the same. Yet something stronger than anger had stopped her voice from agreeing. By morning, the crowd had dispersed, but the tension stayed like a storm waiting to break. Dakota still sat by his horse outside the ruins of town, not daring to cross the boundary the men had drawn with their eyes and rifles. The summary of their story was already heavy before words were spoken. Clara had lost her husband to raiders, and Dakota carried the shame of knowing he had ridden with them. Their first encounter was a clash of silence, guns nearly raised, and eyes filled with suspicion. Yet the desert allowed no space for hatred without consequence. Water was scarce, food even scarcer, and storms promised to sweep in from the west. When need grew stronger than pride, Clara and Dakota found themselves forced to share the same fire. They did not begin as allies. They began as two broken souls bound by necessity, each one unsure whether the other was enemy or salvation. The morning sun exposed every scar left on Dry Creek. Families searched through debris for tools and supplies, desperate to rebuild or flee. Clara stood near what was once her home, clutching the pocket watch as if it could keep her standing. She noticed Dakota had not moved from his place. His horse grazed on dry grass, and he drank sparingly from a small skin of water. When their eyes met, she felt the sting of memory, the sight of her husband falling, the shadow of this man among the flames. Her fingers trembled near her pistol, but she did not draw. She only stared, waiting for him to explain. By noon, the sheriff approached her. "He won't last long without food or water," the old man muttered. "But he won't last the day if the others catch him near town. You spoke for him last night. You keep him away, or I'll finish it myself." Clara gave no reply. She simply turned and walked back to her fire, torn between anger and something she could not name. Later, when the heat burned the streets empty, She carried a small tin cup of water out past the last post where the town ended. Dakota rose to his feet when he saw her, cautious, wary of a trap. She held the cup out. He did not take it first, only looked at her as if waiting for a strike. Finally, he reached, his rough fingers brushing hers. He lifted the cup and drank slow, never breaking her gaze. Clara turned before he could thank her, the pocket watch heavy in her hand. That night, a dust storm rolled in. Families huddled in the remaining structures, boards nailed against gaps, cloth pulled tight against windows. Clara sat alone by a low fire in what was left of her house. The storm howled like wolves through the alleys, and the wind scattered ash across her floor. Then, through the noise, she heard footsteps. Her hand went to her pistol, but when the figure appeared in the doorway, it was Dakota. He had entered without sound, shoulders hunched, his eyes lowered. For a moment, she thought he came to kill her. Instead, he set a bundle down on the floor, 2 rabbits freshly caught. Clara did not lower her gun. Why, she asked. Dakota's words were rough, strained from lack of use. Storm strong. You alone. Food needed. He sat by the fire, not closer than the length of her pistol. The silence grew heavier than the storm outside. She watched him skin the rabbits with careful hands, every movement precise. When the meat began to cook, the smell filled the room. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Clara's stomach growled. They ate without speaking, each bite a reminder that survival required more than grief. The fire cast shadows across their faces, and Clara found herself studying him. The scars, the tired eyes, the way he moved with quiet restraint. He looked more like a man carrying chains than a warrior filled with pride. Still, she could not forgive him. Not yet. After the meal, she spoke. You were there. Her voice was sharp. The night they burned my home. I saw you. His eyes met hers, and there was no denial. Yes. The single word fell heavy between them. She tightened her grip on the watch. Then why are you here? His answer came after a long silence. Because I'm already dead, he said. I have nothing left. My people do not want me. Your people hate me. I ride alone. The storm outside screamed against the walls, but inside the house, it was quiet enough to hear the ticking of the watch. Clara looked at him, her anger caught between his honesty and her pain. She should have shot him then, into the ghost of her husband's killer. Yet her finger never moved. Something in his brokenness mirrored her own. When the storm cleared by dawn, the town awoke to fresh destruction. Roofs were torn, fences broken, food scattered. Men cursed, women wept. Clara stepped outside with Dakota behind her. Whispers spread fast. She sheltered him, voices muttered. She fed him. Guns were raised again, but the sheriff intervened, his voice cracked. With exhaustion. Leave it, he growled. We've enough to fight without killing each other. The men lowered their rifles, but the stares burned into Clara like brands. By midday, the truth of their bond was undeniable. Survival would not allow her to turn him away. He had hunted food. He had stood watch while she slept. And though he carried guilt heavy as stone, he had not fled. The town hated him, and now they hated her for keeping him close. But Clara no longer feared their judgment. She had already lost everything. The twist came when the riders arrived. A band of armed men appeared from the west, their horses coated in dust, their guns polished. They carried the look of bounty hunters, and the moment they saw Dakota, they knew him. That one's wanted, their leader sneered. Dead or alive, he's worth gold. The townsfolk stirred, tempted by the promise of money they desperately needed. The sheriff's silence spoke louder than words. He would not stand in their way. Clara felt her heart slam against her ribs. She could let them take him, see him hang for what he had done. It would be easy, but when she looked at him, standing unarmed by her side, she remembered the storm, the rabbits, the silence they had shared. She heard her own voice speak before she could stop it. He stays. The crowd erupted, curses flying, anger sharp. The bounty hunters laughed, thinking her mad. Yet she did not move, did not bend. She stood between Dakota and their rifles, the pocket watch clenched in her palm like a shield. Dakota said nothing, but his eyes burned with something fierce, surprise, sorrow, and a fire that had not been there before. As the sun fell behind the hills, the hunters rode off with promises to return, and the townsfolk scattered in anger. Clara remained at the fire, her chest heavy with what she had chosen. Dakota sat near, silent as always, but this time his silence carried gratitude she could feel without words. Night settled, the flames low, the watch ticking. Clara knew she had tied her fate to him, for better or worse. The land would test them, the town would not forgive them, and the hunters would be back. She stared into the fire, her heart torn but steady, and wondered how long two broken souls could survive in a world set against them. The land stretched out before them like a furnace of rock and sand, and it seemed determined to break them both. Clara Hayes rode in silence, her dress torn from days in the saddle, her skin burned by the sun. Dakota guided the horse with steady hands, his eyes scanning the horizon for danger. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them was heavy with all that had not yet been said. They had left Dry Creek behind after the bounty hunters promised to return, and though Clara had chosen to stand beside Dakota that night, she knew the cost of her choice had only begun. The summary of their journey was written in hardship. The desert tested them with hunger, thirst, and storms that swallowed the horizon. Each night they shared a fire, small and fragile, while memories slipped through the cracks of silence. Dakota spoke of his people, the losses he carried, the shame that followed him like a shadow. Clara listened, torn between anger and understanding. Then came the moment that shattered what fragile bond they had built. Dakota confessed that he had fought in the raid on Dry Creek, and that his arrow had struck down the man she had loved. Clara's heart broke again, this time not from grief, but from the cruel truth of who rode beside her. The first days on the trail were brutal. Heat pressed down by day, and the cold cut sharp by night. They rationed what little food Dakota hunted, lizards, rabbits, roots dug from hard ground. Clara's stomach turned at first, but hunger left no room for pride. Her hands grew calloused, her body worn, yet she did not complain. Dakota said little, only offering water when she faltered or guiding the horse when her strength waned. He moved with quiet purpose, as if every step westward was one more step away from the ghosts chasing them both. One evening, a storm rose sudden and violent. Wind howled across the plain, carrying sheets of sand that stung like needles. Dakota pulled her from the saddle and led her to the cover of a dry arroyo. They crouched there, the storm raging above, the fireless night pressing cold against their skin. Clara hugged her arms tight, trembling. For the first time since leaving town, Dakota spoke more than a few words. "Storms pass," he said. "Always." She looked at him, his face carved with shadow, and wondered how many storms he had endured before this one. The days blurred together. They followed rivers that ran shallow, scavenged for berries in thorny bushes, and drank from muddy pools when nothing else could be found. At night, they lit fires with dried brush, the smoke rising thin against the stars. It was during those nights that words began to break the silence. Clara spoke of Daniel, of how he dreamed of building houses strong enough to stand for generations. She told Dakota about the pocket watch, how it had been a gift from Daniel's father, and how its ticking reminded her that she was still alive when she wished she was not. Dakota listened, his dark eyes steady, his face unreadable. In return, Dakota spoke of his brother, Chenoa, who had died in a skirmish with soldiers. He spoke of his mother's grave, marked only by stones on a hill, and of how his people scattered when the land could no longer feed them. His voice was low, halting, but his pain was clear. Clara felt a strange pull between them, two lives broken in different ways, yet bound by loss. She hated herself for the flicker of sympathy, for seeing the man instead of the enemy. One night, as the fire burned low, Dakota finally spoke the words that shattered everything. "I was there," he said. Clara looked up, the watch in her hand. "At Dry Creek," he continued. "I fought. I shot arrows into the street. One, found your husband." The fire crackled between them, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her hand shook, the watch slipping from her fingers into the dirt. She stared at him, her heart pounding with rage and sorrow. "You killed him," she whispered. Her voice cracked, the words tasting of blood and ash. Takota did not deny it. His eyes burned, but not with pride. "I killed him," he said, the words heavy as stones. "I see his face every night. I hear your cry. I cannot take it back." Clara reached for her pistol, the steel cold in her hand. Her finger rested on the trigger, and for a moment she saw herself pulling it, ending him there in the glow of the fire. Her chest heaved, her tears hot against her skin. Takota did not move, did not beg. He only lowered his head. "If it gives you peace," he said, "do it." The silence stretched, broken only by the wind and the snapping of firewood. Clara's hand trembled, her finger pressing tight, but she could not pull. She wanted to hate him, to end him, but some cruel twist of fate held her still. She lowered the pistol, the decision cutting deeper than any bullet. Her voice came out raw. "You'll never be forgiven." Takota nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less. The days that followed were colder, not from weather, but from silence. Clara spoke little, her eyes avoiding his, her steps stiff and distant. Takota carried on as before, but his shoulders bent lower, his voice quiet even in small moments. The bond that had begun to grow now cracked beneath the truth. Yet despite the break, they still rode together because the desert gave them no other choice. Their grief turned to survival again when riders appeared on the horizon. Clara spotted them first, dark figures against the setting sun. Takota pulled her into cover among the rocks, their horses tied low. Through the dust, they counted 5 men, armed and searching. Bounty hunters, the same who had ridden from Dry Creek, now tracked them west. Clara's heart raced, fear burning through her anger. Takota's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on his bow. The riders passed close, their voices carrying in the dry air. "He's out here," one growled. "The widow, too. Dead or alive, the gold's the same." Clara's stomach clenched at the thought. Her life now tied to his, her survival worth no more than his death. When the riders moved on, Takota looked at her. They will not stop. She knew he was right. The land itself felt like a trap closing in, with no escape but forward. That night, Clara sat by the fire, the watch ticking in her hand. She thought of Daniel, of the life stolen from them both, and of the man sitting across from her who had admitted to taking it. She hated him. She pitied him. She needed him. The confusion tore at her soul, each thought sharper than the last. Takota broke the silence with a question. "Why did you not shoot me?" She looked up, tears in her eyes. "Because if I kill you, I'll be alone, and I don't know if I can bear that." The fire flickered, the truth raw in the air. Takota lowered his gaze, shame deep in his face, but for the first time, something else lingered there too. Respect, fragile and unspoken. As dawn broke, they packed their things and mounted again. The desert stretched wide and merciless before them, the horizon red as blood. Clara felt the weight of every step forward, knowing the truth of who rode beside her would never leave. Yet she also felt the ticking of the watch, steady and relentless, a reminder that life did not wait for grief to finish its work. She looked at Takota, his figure strong in the saddle, his eyes scanning the land with unbroken focus. She wondered if hate and sorrow could live alongside something else, something she dared not name. The fire of anger still burned, but so did the fragile spark of survival. The desert gave them no answers, only questions carried on the wind. And as they rode west, the horizon dark with storm clouds, Clara asked herself the one question that haunted her most. How long could she ride beside the man who had taken everything from her before the weight broke her for good? The end began with dust on the horizon. Clara Hayes saw it first, a gray smear against the reddening sky, and her stomach sank with the knowledge of what it meant. Takota reined in his horse beside her, his eyes narrowing as the shapes took form. Riders, too many to be chance travelers, coming fast and hard, their silhouettes sharp against the dying sun. Behind them, far to the south, another cloud of dust rose. 2 storms were closing in, one of white men hunting gold, the other of Apache warriors seeking loyalty from one who had strayed. Clara understood then that there would be no escape. The summary of this final chapter was written in conflict. Bounty hunters rode to claim blood and coin. Apache clans rode to test Tuckota's allegiance. And Clara found herself trapped between both worlds. Guns thundered, dust swallowed the plain, and survival demanded choices neither of them wished to make. Clara faced her hate and her need in equal measure, while Tuckota carried the burden of every life his hands had touched. In the end, silence claimed more than bullets, and what remained was not victory, but a fragile truth. Love and hate did not cancel each other. They lived side by side, bound in the same broken heart. They rode hard into the Badlands, hoping to find cover among the rocks, but the hunters were faster. By dusk, the first shots cracked across the valley. Bullets struck the dirt near their horses, spitting dust. Clara ducked low, her heart pounding, as Tuckota led them into a canyon. The walls rose high, offering shelter but also a trap. "They will box us in," she said, fear rising sharp in her chest. Tuckota nodded grimly. Better than open ground. The canyon grew darker as night fell. They dismounted, leading their horses into a narrow cleft where brush offered poor cover. Clara gripped Daniel's pocket watch, its ticking louder than the wind in her ears. She thought of the life stolen from her and wondered if it would end here, in silence and gunfire. Tuckota crouched, near the entrance, bow in hand, his face unreadable. For the first time, Clara noticed how young he still was beneath the scars. Youth worn thin by grief, not years. The hunters came first. 6 of them, their rifles glinting in the moonlight, their laughter echoing against the rock walls. "We know you're in there," their leader shouted. "Bring out the squaw killer and the widow, and maybe we'll make it quick." Clara's blood ran cold at the words. Tuckota did not move, his body still as stone. She watched his jaw tighten, saw his hand tremble once before steadying. Then came the sound of drums. Low, steady, carried on the wind. Clara turned, her eyes widening as shadows moved atop the canyon rim. Apache warriors, a dozen at least, painted in war colors, bows and rifles in hand. The hunters cursed, their leader shouting orders. Clara felt her breath catch. They were surrounded. 2 forces closed in, and she and Tuckota stood in the middle, caught in a fight neither could win. The Apache chief called down in their tongue, his voice carrying with authority. Clara did not understand the words, but Tuckota did. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment his strength seemed to falter. "They say I must choose," he told her quietly. "Stand with my people, or die with you." His words cut deeper than the threat of bullets. Clara's chest tightened, her hand trembling on the watch. "And what will you choose?" she asked, her voice raw. Tuckota looked at her, his eyes burning with a pain she could not name. "I do not know." The first shots broke the air before he could answer. Hunters fired at the rim, Apache rifles answered, and the canyon erupted in chaos. Horses screamed, rocks split with the impact of lead, and dust rose in choking clouds. Clara dropped to the ground, clutching her pistol, firing wildly at shadows moving through the haze. Tuckota's bow snapped string after string, his arrows striking true. But for every man who fell, more pressed in. The battle turned brutal. One hunter crashed through the smoke, grabbing Clara's arm, his blade flashing in the moonlight. She fought, biting, clawing, the pistol slipping from her hand. The man raised his knife, but before the strike fell, an arrow punched through his chest. He staggered, gasping, before crumpling at her feet. Tuckota stood behind him, bow in hand, his face pale with sweat. For a moment, their eyes locked in the chaos, and something wordless passed between them. Fear, relief, and the sharp reminder that their fates were bound. Then came the twist that shattered everything. The Apache chief himself descended into the canyon, his rifle raised, his voice thundering in his own tongue. Tuckota froze, his bow lowering. The chief's words were harsh, commanding, demanding his loyalty here and now. Tuckota's face tightened, torn in two. Clara watched him, her breath caught. knowing that this was the moment. He could step forward, join them, and live. Or stay beside her and die. Slowly, painfully, Dakota stepped forward. Clara's heart broke in her chest. She wanted to scream, to curse him, to beg, but her throat closed. The chief nodded, satisfied, raising his hand to signal his warriors. For a brief instant, Clara thought it was over, that Dakota had chosen survival over her. But then Dakota turned, his bow snapping up, and the arrow flew not at her, but at the chief. It struck deep in the man's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The canyon froze. Shock rippled through the Apache ranks. Dakota's voice rang out, raw and fierce. I will not fight for lies. I will not fight for gold. I will not fight for fire on homes. I fight for truth. The words burned in the silence that followed. Then chaos returned, fiercer than before. The hunters fired into the confusion. The Apaches answered, and the canyon filled with blood and dust. Clara fired her pistol until it clicked empty, her ears ringing, her eyes blinded by smoke. Dakota fought like a man with nothing to lose, his bow giving way to a stolen rifle, his body moving with desperate fury. By the time dawn broke, the canyon was a grave. The hunters lay scattered, most dead, a few fled into the desert. The Apaches withdrew, carrying their wounded, their chief alive but glaring with betrayal. Clara sat against a rock, her body trembling, her dress torn and stained. Dakota stood nearby, his chest heaving, blood streaking his arm from a shallow wound. They were alive, but barely, and the silence of the dead pressed heavy around them. Clara looked at him, her voice breaking. Why did you stay? Dakota lowered his head. Because I could not leave you. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of every choice that had led them here. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, her heart torn between love and hate, forgiveness and rage. She reached for the pocket watch, its ticking steady, unbroken even in the valley of the dead. As the sun rose over the canyon, painting the rocks in blood-red light, Clara leaned her head back and whispered, her voice so soft it barely carried. Do you still remember my touch? Dakota's eyes burned with fire as he looked at her, his silence answering more than words ever could. The wind moved through the canyon, carrying the smell of smoke and blood, carrying their silence out into the endless desert. Clara did not know what waited beyond this place. Vengeance, redemption, or only more sorrow. She only knew that the road ahead would not be walked alone.